call on Supervisor Albrecht.
I move for the adoption of this evening's agenda.
There's a motion and a second to adopt the agenda for this evening. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next item in the agenda is a time for anyone from the public to speak on anything on the agenda this evening or anything under county jurisdiction. Is there anyone who wishes to speak? Is there anyone who wishes to speak? Seeing none, we'll close that portion of the agenda and we'll move on to the next item. And that is reports from committees, commissions, and boards. Any reports from any commissions or boards? Seeing none, I see one. I'll call on Supervisor Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that a number of us attended the WICSA, the Wisconsin County Human Services Association spring meeting. A lot of it had to do with issues around children and youth in our state, a great deal about foster care, and I hope that Bill Topol or others from his department will come and speak to us at a later date about some of the things that we learned. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Powers. Seeing no other call-ins, we'll move on to the next item in the agenda, and that's County Board Chairman's report. So first, Supervisor Egan, Supervisor Lautenschlager, Supervisor Roble, and Supervisor Spellman asked to be excused this evening. Then wanted to remind everyone of the County Board Tour. So we're getting close now. That will be Monday, May 20th. You should have the agenda on your desk this evening. So certainly encourage all to attend, and also do want to, even though I'll thank them again, want to thank the county clerk's office for all their assistance with the process. Certainly appreciated throughout that. And then just also wanted to update you all. The Rethink had their legislative breakfast last week, Friday. It was very wonderfully done. We had pretty good attendance here from the county board. I'd say there were about a dozen county board members there. There were 4 different topics that were discussed, and those include school breakfast. Those included safe streets, place of last drink, in terms of registries for individuals who are found drunk driving, identification as to where they last drank that evening. And then there was also another topic group on vaping and e-cigarette usage and possible local ordinances in regards to that. So it was very well, very nicely done, and I think there's potential throughout our county for there actually to be some changes and possible ordinances as a result of those discussions. So certainly thank you to all who were able to make it. And so that concludes my report. So tonight we have 3 presentations this evening. The first one is the Information Systems Committee's recommendations for the county board's per diem process. So we have Patty Francoeur, Information System Director, to provide that presentation. Dr. Francoeur?
Good evening, everyone. My presentation should only be about 90 minutes or so. I'm kidding. I am here on behalf pretty much of the IS committee and others that felt the per diem process is worthy of a review. So I want to go through the current procedures, some of our suggestions that would streamline and help make it a little bit more efficient, and then just mention our ultimate goal. And you should have a handout that will go through the points I'm talking about. Hopefully it's just a reminder for most of you, but it might be new to some of you, so I will cover as much as I can, and we'll take question and answer session at the end. So looking at the chart, currently the process to request and receive payment for your per diem and or expenses is relatively labor intensive. Everyone does not use a standard form. So there are spreadsheets that literally come in. There are spreadsheets that are used without using the mathematical functions within the spreadsheets. There are handwritten sheets that come in. There are old carbon forms that still come in. So that's one part of the inefficiency. The second part deals with where they're all delivered. These are handed in both in HR and finance, which seems logical. Some are slid under the door, literally in the reception area of HR, in the lobby of the cab building. Some might come inter-office from Human Services or the Veterans. Some are faxed in, and some are even just called in. So we have a huge variation in the process of submitting these forms, and again, all these steps add to time and cost in processing the payment. So, I guess getting to the suggestion part here, a couple steps we want to just put out there to streamline it. Number one would be we would ask that everyone use the standard spreadsheet. And Julie did create a new one, and we can show it. I don't know if you want to do it right away, but we're going to show it. And what she changed is within the spreadsheet, there's a tab for every month. And those will stay every time you save it. So if there's a question when you look at something, did I include that last month or did I forget? It's right there. It's one mouse click away and you can see what you did last month. So that's a new aspect of the spreadsheet. But if we could try to, again, utilizing our iPads and getting even more out of our investment in those devices, try to utilize the standard form. And then the second aspect of it would be the delivery. So we would want you to either email it to the county clerk address, and that's on the sheet, countyclerk@co.winnebago.wi.us, or for those that will still need to deliver it or mail it by U.S. Postal Service, we want it to go to the county clerk's office. So if we can centralize and at least start there, that eliminates a lot of touching, inter-office mailing, sitting on someone's desk for too long, possibly getting your per diem payment, not your expense payment. And I know recently that has improved as far as trying to funnel it to the clerk's office. But again, if you can email it or deliver it right to that office, those are two of the big things. Let's see. Another aspect of it is trying to do it by the 6th of the month to receive payment in the current month. And that is because of the processing that takes place, and then HR and finance both have to do parts on behalf of those departments. And when certain check runs or other things that happen occur and something is submitted later, technically it should wait until the next month for payment. So again, the goal is by the 6th of the month for them to have everything they need. There are written procedures, and I think we have some copies, but there are written procedures for probably every step of this. There's always the help desk that you can contact if you get stuck. You know you can come in. I know a lot of you utilize our department, which is exactly why we're there. And we want you to come in. We'd rather have that happen than struggle or send in the handwritten. Come in, let us help you through, walk you through. So I think those are basically what's happening, the inefficiency, a couple suggestions to make it more streamlined, and then I just put the ultimate goal on the bottom here of the chart for if we ever got to the paperless time and cost saving process. You would literally use the spreadsheet, email it to the chairperson. He would email it to a distribution list that goes automatically to everyone that needs it, and they know everyone that needs it has it, so they just do their part, and then you get your direct deposit. Paperless, time saving, cost saving. So those are the 3 pieces of the sheet I left for you, and I guess I'm ready if you have questions, comments.
Questions and thoughts? So I see a couple so far. Supervisor Wojciechowski, followed by Supervisor Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So and thank you, Patty, for presenting this. So I want to start off by saying the IS committee has been working on this now for quite a bit. And the reason why we're here and why I asked Patty if we could present this is because we're kind of in the feedback stage right now. We have been in contact a lot with the county clerk's office, with Shiloh, with finance, and the other departments that deal with this, HR, finance, everyone. But we wanted to come to the full county board to get their input because we're at the point where we see that the process is kind of a mess right now. And we've talked about some of the horror stories of it gets dropped off at different department buildings and they don't really know what to do with it. Or it's called in and Sue or someone has to write it in for the person, or it's just a somewhat of a mess. And I think as elected officials, we should be pushing for, efficiency where we can and trying to streamline the process. And I think there are a lot of things we can do. And I think, so I have this sheet and no one else does, but maybe we can try to get this out at some point. But it was basically a process where Patty met with, I think it was the finance director and Sue and a couple other people, and they kind of just like put a process for approvals and everything. And in this, they streamlined it to at least 3 methods. So that was either emailing it the way we have right now. You could mail it in to one specific address, which would be the county clerk's office, or deliver it in person to the county clerk's office. And I think this is a really good compromise, or at least baby step, because I think at least at the minimum, we should at least get it down to one location. We should at least have it all going to one central spot so there's not papers missing, people aren't not getting paid, and we can correct mistakes when they're there. So what we're here for today is to get your input. The IS committee meets tomorrow. We're not going to be taking any action as of yet. We're hoping to get feedback and maybe put forward a resolution, because right now there's procedures, but there's no written part that says you have to do it this way. And I think, we should do something that says this is how it should be done, and we'll go from there. So we'd really love to have your feedback on this. And I do have one question for the county clerk's office, just to get people's perspective. So what is the current process, the way it is, how does that work in the county clerk's office? What troubles have you ran into, the extra work that you have to do? Can you kind of just explain that process?
I'm going to ask Julie to participate in this because this is kind of her forte, the things that she takes care of. She works with you more directly with per diems than I do. But I know the one thing is with the receipts is a big deal, having to scan to get things electronically to the finance department. But that's the big thing, that's very time consuming. So trying to get people to either take photographs of the receipts on their iPhones and emailing things in, that would be very helpful. Julie, what else do you want to touch on? Stretch.
I think my major concern is that it's so sporadic around the whole county where they're delivered to. My fear, and I think finance and HR, is that we're going to miss somebody, and we don't want to do that. So if we can streamline it to the county clerk's email address, I think that would be the best for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Wojciechowski. Next speaker, Supervisor Eisen, followed by Supervisor Locke.
I'm looking at the ultimate goal. Email to the chairperson. Not only is that patently unrealistic, but it's going to be expensive to have a full-time secretary for the part-time chairman, whomever the future chairman will be, to process these expense and per diems. That's patently unrealistic. Perhaps Having done this for 13 years, I got into a pattern of mailing to the human resource connection, and then when the time limit, the first Monday of the month was communicated that reports needed to be in, I began to fax the report to the clerk's office. I think what we need to do in this process is to identify one full-time employee of the county who has the responsibility of receiving these expense reports and per diem reports. And everybody, the 36 supervisors, are responsible to get that report. If they want to get paid, get that report to that reporting person. Now, it could be to the deputy clerk. It could be to the secretary that she assigns to handle the incoming documents. It could be to the human resource department. What has seemed to prevail is a whole variety of incoming reports on a whole variety of different documents from what I've heard reported. People sending in carbon copies. That's got to be at least 8 years old since we've used carbon copies. I don't know if there's any carbon copy that is available. Where do the supervisors get these carbon copies? They must have had a supply, and they certainly would have had to be here at least 8 years. But anyway, I think that it's unrealistic to put this kind of burden on any chairman unless you intend to have a secretary for the chairman to do his paperwork. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Eisen.
Can I respond to that?
Oh, of course, please.
So first, I just want to reemphasize and clarify that we are asking it to go to one, we are trying to funnel it to one person, as you were stating. We do want it to go to the county clerk's email address or the county clerk's office. So if you can email it, that is the address we want to use. Again, just to reemphasize, there is one, Paul. And then if you deliver it in person or use the U.S. Postal Service, we want it addressed to the county clerk's office. And then if I don't want to step over my bounds, but to explain the ultimate goal, the first step is not unrealistic. The first step would be a tremendous savings in time, because I'm not sure you know what your chairperson does right now. The clerk's office processes all your different submissions into a standard paper form so that your chairperson can go through them and make changes or corrections. So he already looks at paper forms for all 36 of you every time. So emailing it to him, he would have it in an electronic, him or her, whoever's in the future. They would have an electronic form that would save time, actually.
Well, if things stay true to form, and in 2020, if there happens to be redistricting and the county board is cutting half the size to 18 supervisors from 36, that'll have your problem.
Thank you, Supervisor Eisen. Next speaker, Supervisor Luck, followed by Supervisor Snyder.
Okay, I always mail mine in. I don't know where I mail it to offhand. The envelopes are marked already. But I take pictures of the receipts with my iPad, just in case they get lost in the mail. Is that okay?
Is it okay to do that? Sure.
Okay.
That is a way you could send it in electronically. That's what we were getting at. I think one of the clerk's staff mentioned that. If you email the spreadsheet and you have expenses that require a receipt, to send those in electronically as well, you would simply take your photograph and email it to the clerk as well. Even if you don't connect them together for now, this would be the first step in the process of getting it all electronic. So if you email your spreadsheet, email your photos of your receipts, they can put them together for the electronic processing.
You can't take a picture of the, that,
The spreadsheet,
yeah.
do you want a photo of that, or? I mean, it's easier if you just email the spreadsheet, because then they
Yeah.
can
Okay. Thank you.
work with it.
Thank you, Supervisor Lockton. Next speaker, Supervisor Snyder, followed by Supervisor Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Paul, for your edification, Veteran Service Commission uses carbon copies for our citizen members. I suppose we could try to drag them kicking and screaming into the current century, but it seems to work fairly well, and it saves Judy Steckbauer some time. So unless we get a more streamlined way, I think we may just continue with the carbons, if that's all right. For the time being, I think there's only 3. And that's actually a good suggestion. I hand deliver mine every week, every month, and that's a good reason for me to get down and say hi to the girls. But I suppose I could start taking phone pictures of my receipts and sending them under separate copy. That might work. I never thought of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Snyder. Next speaker, Supervisor Norton, followed by Supervisor Lenz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I support this ideal. I've used it for a number of years, but my question is, are we going to have a rule, do we need a rule change that says the per diem report will only be accepted by the county clerk's office, and that's the way you're going to get paid? Because if you don't put that in there, someone in September, they could do one of the many ways that Patty mentioned. They could give it to some department and have a fax in. Are you going to be that specific? Because this is a very good system. I'm very confident. I've been doing it for years. I send it to Julie. Julie, I always say, Julie, send me an email and make sure you get this. She gets it. For a couple of years, I was sending it both to Julie and to someone in the HR department. Says, Mike, stop that, because then Shiloh might get one-on-one copy, and I have stopped that. And that's how Shiloh does it, and that's how I believe Dave Albrecht, when he's chairman. They get them, and he collects them, and he approves of them. So I support this, but I think my advice to the IS committee and whoever, unless we put some kind of rule that you send it to the county clerk's office, and if you don't, you ain't going to be able to get paid for the month, you're going to be delayed, then it's meaningless, because it's going to be like this thing we're supposed to use, that I use, that people refuse to use, it'll be meaningless. So is that what the IS committee is thinking?
I don't feel I'm in the position to make that kind of rule, but I would support it.
I'm just saying, I mean, Mr. Chairman, the IS committee or the judicial, unless you have that kind of a rule, I support this idea wholeheartedly, Patty, I do. But without it, it's meaningless, because come September, whoever was faxing them in, will fax them in, or do what the main process. That's my own opinion.
Thank you, Supervisor Norton. Next speaker, Supervisor Lenz, followed by Supervisor Wingren.
All right. Thank you, Patty, for putting this together. I know as a person from IT working in software, it's hard to put together all the details, or enough details, into just a simple document. The more information you put on there, the more people want to fall asleep before they get to the end of it. On the other hand, there's a lot of appreciation for all the work that you guys have done to get it down to this simple format. And a lot of questions that have come up and discussions and thinking of some of the different challenges that different folks on the board are going to run into and trying to account for that up front. There are a few questions I've asked in committee that I want to just ask you with the whole board here. But one of the things I do want to point out is in our conversations, we did talk about Ideally, it would be nice to get to a point where we can, as you said, ultimate goal. That's going to make our departments more efficient. That's going to better utilize our county's resources. But it's the ultimate goal, and I guess one point of clarification is this next go-around, we're not intending on getting everybody forced onto a tablet. We're planning on giving them a paper option so they can still mail it in. But with the paper option, we're trying to get to a format that is consistent with what we're going to do, what I would do online, so that we're not trying to merge up 20 different iterations of the similar document. So I just took your nod of the head as a yes to that one. So, just for the folks in the room, emails, we still got the address to mail it into. I'm sure that the clerks would have no problem seeing you. That's the same as mailing it in and just saving the postage stamp. But I did want to ask one question, which was a learning point for me. If we do email it in from the email that's published out there on the website, do we also need to sign it? Because that's something that I've been doing is printing it, signing it, taking a photo of it, and then sending it in. So I'm going to just put that question out there. The other question I have for you is, if this does go to resolution and we do decide to pass it, are we planning on having good communications and making sure that everybody's comfortable with the process before we hit whatever the date is we agree to for executing this plan? And those are just a couple things that I wanted to ask you so that all the folks in the room know the answer.
We definitely could do some sort of training or make a packet of the written instructions that we have. I know some of you have been taking advantage of coming into the help desk or into our department. It's why we're there, and I hope, you feel the service is good. If you want one-on-one help, that's the best way to do it.
And then the email question. If I email it to you, do I need to sign it? If it's coming from my published email address?
No.
I know other auditing service accept email that is proven to come from.
And then the last point I want to make is, with Ultimate Goal, we haven't gone into too much detail based off of feedback that I witnessed when I believe it was the week before I was seated on the board, as well as that first week after. We see that using the iPads it's going to be a learning curve for a lot of folks, and we're going to go through growing pains. So we haven't talked through exactly what all those details would look like, but we don't want to pretend like we're not trying to streamline this. If it does go to the chairperson, it would be a streamlined process, and we would utilize technologies that are out there, such as maybe a common email address. The idea is that we'll get it into a format that chairperson would be able to effectively and efficiently utilize in order to get through it, so that they're not getting burdened with, we'll just say, busy work of signing off on all this. So thank you, Patty, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Supervisor Lenz. Next speaker, Supervisor Wingren, followed by Supervisor Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those of you who know me know that I'm proud of being on the cutting edge of technology. And I also like to speak as a semifinalist for the Per Diem Preparer of the Year Award. I just want to say thanks to the IS committee for trying to, I originally thought maybe this is a solution in search of a problem. Maybe it is. But Julie does a really good job. I email them in. Why don't we just do it like they say? Everybody emails it in to Julie, she gets it to Shiloh, case closed. You don't have to make a federal case out of this. I think maybe having everybody do the same thing is as Aaron, I think, said, is very efficient. And efficient is good. So applaud you, Patty, and to the committee for coming up with a good solution here, I think.
Thank you, Supervisor Wingren. Next speaker, Supervisor Finch, followed by Supervisor Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bill, are you reading my notes? Because I felt the same way as far as Julie's done a lot of my wife does it for me, because I'm not that great on a computer, and it goes to Julie, and she makes the final corrections. But I guess where I'm going to be coming from is, by doing this way, are we going to start taking advantage of the clerk's office? They got a pretty full job the way it is. Now we want to add more to it. And I guess I just don't want to see where we overwork them. Because if they get too much overworked, I think some of them might turn around and look for another job elsewhere. So, which I do not want to see. But I've seen this throughout my life, where if they come in and they overwork the people, they're going to go elsewhere. And I really don't care to see that. So all I can say is, if you want to do it that way, at least make sure the clerks have a better way and an easier way of handling it all than to just shove it on them. Thank you.
Supervisor Finch, if you don't mind, I feel like I can actually answer the question. And I'm not trying to speak for him, but at least from my angle, what you're wondering about, they're already doing. It's just coming in different ways. And the ultimate result, depending on where it's coming and where it's flowing, ends up coming to me through them somehow, whether either in a paper form or, frankly, believe it or not, an electronic version that is already occurring before that pay period. The electronic form is occurring depending on how close to the deadline a different per diem sheet comes in, then they will communicate it electronically to me. So to answer, just to answer your question, Supervisor Finch, in terms of overbidding them.
Thank you for that.
Yep, they're already in that process now.
I didn't realize it.
Sure.
That you actually did something for us. Gotcha. No,
So
thank
I
you.
just wanted to make sure I could clarify that, at least from my end. So thank you, Supervisor Finch. Next speaker, Supervisor Weiss, followed by Supervisor Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I come from a Microsoft background, so coming into this position with Apple has been a challenge for me on that, and fortunately the clerk and deputy clerk have been very, very good with me on that. A question for you on the iPad. When I go on to numbers and I select the spreadsheet and fill it in and I want to send it, it's a share, I guess, and I have the options of sharing it as numbers, Excel, PDF, and I think that's it. I've been sending it in PDF. Is that not a good idea, or should I switch it over to Excel?
You're doing it right.
PDF, okay.
PDF is good.
All right, that brings me to the second part of the question is that, so I'm going to send it in as a PDF, and now it's going to have to be hand calculated and everything else to make sure all the numbers are right and that Jim Wise really is on this committee and things like that. Because it's a difference of the numbers versus the Excel spreadsheet on that. I guess the county uses Excel, Microsoft spreadsheets that you're converting this to. So I think we're missing the boat here. I love the Apple. I love my Apple iPad. I have one at home too now. But do we need to standardize with the county and go to Excel and you may get Microsoft iPad or tablets in the future so that it can be very streamlined? I used to, in the business, I used to work that we would send in spreadsheets with our expense accounts on, have all the attachments right on the spreadsheet and everything, and the supervisor, all he had to do is just sign it off. Yeah, it's done. It's a done deal. And it went into accounting, and all the right fields were filled in accounting based on it. And if Jim Wise wanted to go to a committee meeting and he's not on that committee, it would just kick it right out right away on that. He had no business being in there. So anyway, is there ever a chance where we're going to go from iPad back into Excel, or is the county interested in going from Excel to the iPad?
As a county, we probably will stay Microsoft. It's so ingrained in everything, and we interface with so many agencies that use Microsoft that is a tough boat to get out of. When the board initially got the iPads, it was more of a cost and a user-friendly start to using electronic devices. It was easier training. Essentially, we put everything that is utilized is free, and that's the route we started with, basically as a test, I guess, to see if the adoption of the devices took off, and we could. reap some good rewards from utilizing them, but there's definitely always a chance to change the device and go Microsoft. That would be a big cost times 36, so that is definitely up to the chairperson with his budget.
Can I follow up on a question?
Sure.
That being the case, I don't know how Apple is situated, but is there a chance that Apple will ever allow an Excel spreadsheet on their devices where we could do it in Excel and send it to you, so there is less having to manually, okay, here Jim was at this meeting and so on. That is all done, and a nice clear-cut spreadsheet is created for Shiloh to sign.
I guess off the top of my head, there's a possibility that we could utilize a cloud service for Office, and you would just utilize your device to go to the internet and use, say, Office 365. I'm not sure. That's just thinking off the top of my head, but I don't know of Microsoft itself being on Apple.
Okay. That would really streamline things. If you really
Yeah.
want to, I don't want to put Julie out on the street or anything, but it would really streamline things for us. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Weiss. Before going to the next speaker, I'm going to allow Supervisor Lenz, because he was going to give a clarifying answer to the question that you had just asked.
Yeah, we haven't come to any decision on that, but I had investigated. I had the same question. I have a background with Microsoft products. And I had investigated, and some of the things that I was able to use was Google has a spreadsheet which translates the Excel document pretty well. It maintains all those formulas. There is an app out there that can be downloaded. I haven't gone any further to see how many features are out there. So there may be a pay-for option that you'd have to look into. But I can tell you, there's options out there, and we can further explore that so that we can get you a better answer if this goes to resolution.
Thank you, Supervisor Lenz. Next speaker, Supervisor Wojciechowski, followed by Supervisor Defferty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the feedback. Just real quick off that question, so when I do my per diem, I do Google Drive and Google spreadsheet in there, and you can easily, when you download it, you can convert it into PDF, and then that's how I send it. So yeah, there are many ways you can do it, and I think by streamlining it, we can pinpoint one solution that we know will work. But I wanted to also address just some of the comments that were made. So the county clerk's office and even Shiloh, the work that, we're afraid being put on them is already happening. The per diems go to Shiloh and he will redline them or make corrections and then send them to whoever he needs to send them to. But our goal is, and looking at this ultimate goal, I don't think, it might be optimistic. I don't think it's impossible, because if you just break it down, we're sending it to Shiloh. He does what he needs to, sends it to the email distribution list. He just has to send it to one thing, and he'll just send it to everyone. Then everyone does their own work, and it's basically done. It's a pretty simple process. And obviously, we're working on baby steps to get there, because we don't want to just go from where we are now to this and, kind of leave everyone struggling, which is why we've thrown in the suggestions of at least starting with having the mail process or having delivered it in person. So that way, people who need time to adjust, we have those options. Or for people who don't have access to internet, because some people don't, and that's fine, we have other options available for people. The goal is obviously to get to emailing, just because that will, I think, be the ultimate streamlining process. But I also think, county employees who work here are expected to enter their hours, and I think they probably use some type of software, make sure they're in on time and it's done a specific way, and that's the only way they can do it. And I think we should really be expected to do the same. I think maybe we have a little more leniency in how we do it, whether that be emailing, mailing, or bringing it in, but we should at least start somewhere. And I think where we are now is why we are having the problems that we have now, and I think we could alleviate a lot of the work from the county clerk's office by following some type of standard procedure. I will throw in also that the IS committee is meeting tomorrow, 6 o'clock. Our meeting will be here tomorrow instead in this room. So if you do have more questions, concerns, comments, please come tomorrow to give some feedback if you do. At 5 o'clock, sorry, not 6, 5 o'clock. But I will just end with, I think I do really appreciate the feedback. We are trying to make this as easy as possible, but I really do think, in all honesty, that something needs to happen. And like Mike said, I would like to see a resolution outlining the process and, frankly, having some type of, I don't want to say, you know, not punishment, but if you don't turn it in, then you don't get paid. And that's kind of what happens now, but having that at least in writing so we don't have disputes. So, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Wojciechowski. Next speaker, Supervisor Defferting, followed by Supervisor Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say that I fully support this. This is it's great that we're streamlining the process, and that's kind of what that's. I think that's the key term, is that we're streamlining it and we're becoming more efficient with this process. I kind of want to echo the same sentiments that Supervisor Lentz said in regards to maybe what we can do is have set aside a couple of dates where, you know, county board members can come in if they need assistance in how this is done. Maybe you know, set aside a half hour to an hour, or maybe less, 15 minutes or 10 minutes, 5 minutes, what have you, and so that everyone can be coached on it, and so that we're all on the same page. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Defferting. Next speaker, Supervisor Albrecht, followed by Supervisor Gordon.
I just wanted to commend you, Patty. This is very well done, and there will always be some that are held in late. We furnished everybody with an iPad so everybody could be on the same system. That's why everybody went to an iPad some years back, so that everybody was on the same system, so it wasn't all helter-skelter. So, but I think this is very well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Albrecht. Next speaker, Supervisor Gordon, followed by Supervisor Eisen.
Am I on? Julie, I wanted to say, thank you for the tab feature on the spreadsheet. I didn't notice it, though, for the first 4 months of this year. So now, instead of saving it again every month under a new name, I will use the tab.
Thank you, Supervisor Gordon. And next speaker, Supervisor Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to remind everyone that not everyone has email, nor can you make it a requirement to be digital to become a supervisor in Winnebago County. Until you can put that requirement in the job description, you're not going to get your ultimate goal. Accept the fact that each of the supervisors and the citizen appointees have individual needs, but identify one particular county employee, full-time employee, that everyone can feed the information to and process it, and then reach the goal. From my vantage point, I've been on the board for 12 years, and I don't think I've missed one paycheck from the county. I try to get my paperwork in on time, and the county reciprocates by compensating me for meeting those requirements. So that's my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Eisen. Next speaker, Supervisor Binder, followed by Supervisor Norton.
I guess just out of curiosity, what percentage of the 36 of us do use the email?
It's more than half use it by email, so.
I know I use the email. You can do it any evening that you want, sitting in your chair. You can't really get any easier. But we should just have one standard form like you have up there. And I guess if they want to mail it in, bring it in person, but there should only be one form. So that's the only form that Julie should be receiving. So I would recommend that basically you print them out, and the people that basically mail them in or bring them in, either to bring it in on that form or send it back to them.
Thank you, Supervisor Binder. And next speaker, Supervisor Norton.
I'll be very brief. I just want to point out to Mr. Supervisor Eisen, what Supervisor Bender just pointed out, you can email them on an iPad. You can email it on your home computer. You could go to the county clerk's office and give it to them. You can mail it to the county clerk's office with a stamp. But the point I think we're trying to get is that all goes to the county clerk's office. That's what we should be doing. Email, mail it, or deliver it to yourself.
Thank you, Supervisor Norton. Seeing no other call-ins, I just want to add, first of all, I want to thank the IS committee. I want to thank Director Frank Coeur, and I also want to thank Finance and the clerk's office, because it's really very much a team effort in regards to this. But piggyback a little bit on the last comment. So just so we're all clear, right now, did you call in? Yes, I did. Okay, so if I could just finish this comment really quickly then. I'm sorry, I didn't see her. If I could just finish. Okay. So if we're just so we're all clear for the moment, the moment is what actually Supervisor Eisen is referring to, that it is funneled to essentially 1 point. That's what's being requested now. So funneling to the 1 point of the county clerk's office, whether via email or hand delivered. The ultimate goal is a vision of something that could happen another way. But just so we're clear, right now it's funneled to that 1 point, and then between that and a potential ultimate goal, we may find something in the middle. But that's kind of where we're at for the moment. So Supervisor Finch?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the people that are a little bit like me, that's not too knowledgeable on the computers and stuff like that, Patty has helped me, and her staff has helped me like you wouldn't believe. So if some of you are a little bit like me and you're going to make some changes, Patty will recommend this person or that person because they did one heck of a good job on helping me and showing me how to use the iPad. So in front of everybody, I want to say thank you to you and your staff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Finch. Seeing no other call-ins, we'll conclude that presentation. Supervisor Brunn, that's right under the.
I just would like to say that I've been doing the electronic, but I don't have the form with tabs on, so I'm wondering if Julie could send that to all of us again. And Joel doesn't either. We don't have the tabs on the bottom.
Absolutely, we'll
Thank
make
you.
sure that happens. Thank you, Supervisor Brunn. Moving on to the next presentation, and that is the overview of the budget process with our Finance Director, Vicki Fitzgerald. Director Fitzgerald, it's all yours. And you all should have a PowerPoint printed copy of the presentation on your desk as well.
Good evening, everyone. And as he said, there is a printed copy of this presentation on your desks as well. So I thought tonight I would help start to train the board and just make sure everyone understands how we budget, how we put the budget together, a little bit about our process, a little bit about our timelines, and just start to educate you. In the next special orders meeting, I'd like to come and educate you more on our comprehensive annual financial report that is our actuals that happen through our audited financial statements. So I'll keep trying to do this and work with you. So first I wanted to start with our budget book. We have to first look at, in governmental accounting, we have to look at funds. So we have two different types of funds in governmental. We have accounting, it's governmental funds, and then we have proprietary funds. So I'm going to first talk about the governmental funds. We start out with I have them listed in the next page here. We have our general fund. That is our main fund that we do our operating expenses out of. We talk about the unreserved general fund balance and so forth. That's the fund that's in. Secondly, there's the special revenue fund, and what that is, it's intended for a specific purpose of revenue, and it's limited to that particular use. So we, at the county, use that fund for Department of Human Services because the monies that come in are intended for a specific purpose. But it's still governmental funds. So in the end, when the actuals happen, that fund should be at zero at the end. So that's when we end up having some surpluses sometimes. From the special revenue fund, we put the surplus back into the general fund. So that's that fund. Then there's two other types of funds. There's a debt service fund, and that accounts for any repayment of debt. So when I ask to bond for certain capital projects, that is where we repay the bond issues. We also have a capital projects fund that goes with the debt service fund. And what that is that's the capital projects that we come before you with and ask for bond issues. And I just want to make sure you understand with the general fund and the special revenue fund, I come to you at budget hearings and ask for approval of that operating budget. And that comes from my operating tax levy that I'll talk about in a little bit. Well, with capital, so the capital and the debt service of asking for bond issues, we don't get an approval up front from the board in our current process. I give you in January a 5-year capital improvement plan, and it's this little book, and it tells you what each department is planning on doing for capital projects in the next 5 years. We talk about the upcoming year, so it'll be 2020 that I'll talk about, and we'll say this is what we plan on doing, and here's what we think we are going to bond for that first year. But there's no vote taken on this book. There's no approval. It's almost a wish list, but trying to tell you what we're planning on doing for the next year. But if certain department heads don't get to those projects, then we don't bond for them. So that's why we bond after the fact, because we don't approve a capital budget up front. So I just wanted to make sure we had an understanding of that. So those are our governmental funds. Next page, we have what's called proprietary funds. And there's two types of proprietary funds. There's enterprise funds and internal service funds. So I'm going to go over the enterprise funds first. And what those are, they're accounted for more like a private business enterprise, because they bring in enough revenue to actually take care of their costs, as well as they could have a surplus or a deficit in that fund, and it stays within that fund balance. So we have 4 different funds that in our enterprise funds that we account for in the county. We have the airport, we have solid waste, we have Parkview, Health Center, and the highway. Normally, many enterprise funds are self-sustaining. At the county here, the solid waste and highway department, we do not budget any tax levy for. So we consider them self-sustaining, and if they have a deficit or a surplus, it'll just absorb in their fund balance. The airport and Parkview, in the past we have budgeted supplemental tax levy from our operating levy, but Parkview the last few years has come in so strong, we're not even applying fund balance that we say we're going to for them. So they're coming in a lot stronger, and I think it's the different reimbursements they're getting for the nursing homes. And the airport's been coming in a lot stronger as well, but we still are in the budget saying we're supplementing them. So, and I'll take questions at the end of this too. So then next we have the internal service funds. And what that is, it's primarily when we provide benefits or services for the other funds or other departments, so it's more internally accounting for taking care of the other departments and funds. The first one we have is that we account for here at the county is the General Services Fund. And what that is, we have a mail room and we have a print shop there as well. They take care of all of our postage, all of our mail. They take care of printing the budget books and the CIP plans and so forth. And then what they do is bill out to the department. So they pretty much break even in the end. So it's just to service the other departments. Then we have a self-funded workers' compensation plan. So claims come out of there. When we charge the different departments for their workers' comp claims, that comes in as revenue, and it sustains itself and takes care of the workers' comp. We do that for property and liability insurance as well. And then we also have self-funded health and dental insurance. So in each of the different departments, we charge the employees a premium. Well, that premium becomes revenue in these accounts, and then any claims are paid out of this internal service fund. And that's where we have to look at the health insurance and dental and see if we're bringing in enough premiums from the employees to cover what the actual premiums to the health insurance companies are. And that's where we're always having to look at that every year, depending on how much insurance companies go up on their premiums for us. And we had a really good year last year. It was only 2.1% increase. So besides looking at funds, we then break down our budget book. I don't know if you remember the tabs in our budget book, but we actually budget by division. So we have our first division is administration, and just to give you an idea what's all included in those, it's the county executive, the corporate counsel, county clerk, treasurer, finance, HR, those internal service funds that are self-funded are in there as well, and IT and facilities. So it's all your services that are general to all the other departments. Then we have public safety, and that's our district attorney, clerk of courts, sheriff, coroner, and emergency management. Our next one is transportation, which would be airport and highway. Then we have health and human services, and that includes public health, child support, veterans, human services, and Parkview. Then we go by education, culture, and recreation, which is, we have UW Fox Valley that we take care of that facility. We have university extension and the parks department for the recreation part. Then there's planning and environment, which is a register of deeds, planning, and land and water conservation. Lastly, we have a non-divisional section, and that would include you guys, the county board, the scholarship program that we have for the high school students. And then I am in charge of also an unclassified division. It's where it doesn't fit in any of the other ones, and it's where I budget the contingency. When I say we're going to take this out of the contingency account, that's where I do that budgeting. I do for other operating grants with how we subsidize the library, bridge and culverts, the county fair, and stuff like that. That's where that is in the budget. So that's how we go by division in our budget. Okay. Then the big thing is our property taxes. There are 3 different types of levies I have to look at. The first one is the one we're very familiar with, and it's the operating levy rate. And with that's what funds our general fund and our special revenue fund. And we have been limited to only net new construction on last year's levy that we can increase by. So this last year, that equated to about $880,000. That's not even a 2.5% increase in wages before you look at anything else. So that 1.43 last year is what we were looking at. We're hoping for a little larger this year, but I'm being more conservative than I think my boss would want me to be on that. But we do not find that number out until August 1st, so we really have to just preliminary estimate and then hope for what we're thinking. So the second part of the tax levy is the debt service levy rate. And like I was telling you before, we have that debt service fund and the capital projects fund. That's what that's for. It's to do the bond issues. It's exempt from levy limit freezes. However, after 2005, as long as we have the 3/4 vote that we always need from you for capital project bonding, then we can have our limit be whatever we set it at. And on the next page, I'll talk about where we've been in the last 10 years with that. And then lastly, what's a little different here is, in my past life at the technical college, your tax rate was operating levy plus debt equals your total levy. Here we also have what's called special purpose levies, and there's no limitations on that. And what that covers is the library, public health, and the culvert and bridge aid. And it's a blended rate. I can't even give you an exact rate. It's a blended rate when we do all of our equalized value calculations together. And the reason that is the library, public health, and culvert and bridge aid do not cover the entire county. So we can't just have a tax rate over the whole county for that because it's only for certain areas, and that's where that becomes a blended rate. So on the next page, to continue a little bit more about the tax levy, I already had mentioned in the last slide that net new construction last year came in at about 1.43%. This year, if we were to estimate 1.8% increase in net new construction, we're looking at $887,000 that I would have to increase the budget by. And again, that wouldn't cover a 2% raise at this point, just to put that in perspective, plus any health insurance increases, which we expect again. So I have here the history of our tax rates for the last 10 years, and 2019 being on the bottom of that chart. Our overall equalized rate, so that's taking our operating rate, our debt service rate, and our blended rate, put it together, it was $5.26. That, as you can see, for the last 10 years has decreased every year. So we have been really trying to manage that. And obviously with operating, we don't get to move that number very much at all. So the operating levy has has maintained around the same and actually was down somewhat by 17 cents. Debt service, that's the one again where we don't have a limit and it depends how much we bond for. And we've been really trying to keep that at a very equal rate. And then last year we lowered it by 2 cents and we're looking to try to do that again this year. But to keep it pretty equal, when we're keeping it that equal, then we are paying more upfront on our new bond issues, than if we just said we're going to pay this much every year for 10 years. We're paying more upfront right now to keep it more equal, just to give you an idea. And the blended rate says NA because it's a blended rate. It's all over that adds up. All right, so then within our budget, just so everyone understands that, we have in our operating budget, again, we're talking in the general fund, special revenue funds, and even in our enterprise funds. We first have revenues. That can include taxes, intergovernmental revenue, which that would be like at the airport, the FAA and the Bureau of Aeronautics gives us money towards, I don't know, a taxiway. And that would be intergovernmental revenue when we bring in that money. Public charges, license and permits, interfund transfers, that's if like the general fund gave money to the health insurance fund like they did last year and stuff like that, and then just other revenues. And I wanted to show this chart. This was from our 2019 budget book, and it shows that our tax levies, which is the biggest piece of the pie on the top right, is about 40.9%. So that's a lot that we're getting from taxes and for our revenue to help fund our operations. Second largest would be our intergovernmental revenue. And again, that's also any grants, it's state, federal funding, and highways as well. They get money from the state, from the DOT, Department of Transportation. So to the next page, this is a big one just to even understand when we come for budget transfers is we have 4 main categories for our expenses in our budget. We have labor, which will include the wages and the fringe, travel, and that mostly consists of registration for, tuition, lodging, meals, and just mileage for the employees. Capital outlay, this is not to be confused with capital projects again, because capital projects are what we come to you with the CIP plan and bond for. These are small capital items that are under $5,000 or over $5,000, but in order to be a capital project, it has to have a 5-year life and be over $100,000. So just to give you an idea. So capital outlay here comes right out of our operating tax levy. And then the last category is other operating expenses. It's kind of a catch-all for all your supplies and postage and anything that doesn't fall in the other 3 categories. And again, throughout the year, even after we set this budget, if a department is over in any one of those 4 categories, they have to go before their committee, before Personnel and Finance Committee, and then before the board if it's over $15,000 to transfer funds between those categories. So those categories are very important. I have a chart here as well from the 2019 budget book, and if I add up wages and fringe, it's about 48.7% for our labor. So that we are very service-oriented as a county, and that definitely supports that almost 50% of our expenses are our labor. The other largest part at 49.3% is our other operating expenses, and then very little for travel. We're only at 0.5%. If that shows you that we don't abuse I don't see it here that we're abusing travel expense. And then one last piece of when I'm setting the budget for the operating budget is that I look at a department's revenues, and then I look at their expenses, and the difference is going to be the tax levy needed, and then we make sure it's not over an increase that we're expecting from previous years. And I also have in here parentheses given. There's a few different departments, the Treasurer's Office, Register of Deeds, Child Support. They actually give us a negative levy, so we actually get money towards our levy for something else because they're actually making money to a degree. So we're not supplementing them; they're actually supplementing us. So that was that piece. And then I have here what levy we give by division, you'll see on the bottom that public safety is 36.8%, and human services coming in second at 33.4%. All right. So that's the things we have to think about when we're putting the budget together. Then I thought I would include a little timeline just for you all to understand when we start, how we start, and sometimes we start all the way in April. So April 16th, I had a budget kickoff meeting, and the county exec and I sat with all the department heads, and we have to come up with estimates, and they are truly more estimates right now because we don't have what our actual health insurance increase is going to be yet. We'll have that by around July. We don't know net new construction yet till we get preliminary numbers August 1st, so we have to guess on, we know they just built Oshkosh Corp's building out there. That's net new construction. And they built, the arena, so we have to kind of guess what's all coming onto the tax roll this year versus next year. And then we have to think about what we want to maybe try to give the employees for a wage increase to start with, and then we give a starting point. So we at least talk about here's what our assumptions are to start with, but only estimates. Then on Monday, I sent every department head what we call their levy targets. We look at what their expenditures were last year, what we think we're going to increase labor by. I even did a 0% increase for non-labor expenses this year and gave them their new levy amount. They get this levy amount, and then they can start building their budget. And with that, they get from now until July 19th to build their budgets, and then they're due back to my department to then start getting ready for our budget meetings. In the process of all that, they're already built their budgets. Then I finally get a preliminary net new construction amount from the state on August 1st. I believe I get the final ones August 15th-ish, and it didn't change last year. So preliminary is usually pretty good unless we find a big mistake, but we don't usually. So then mid-August, every department has to sit down with the county exec and myself, and a lot of times the chairperson from their committee will come too, and they're always welcome. And we sit down and really go line by line over their budget. I do a lot of different formulas beforehand and look and average out the last few years. I just do a lot of analysis of, do you really need this amount here? And I nitpick. I'm sure they don't enjoy me during that time, but so we definitely try to find our savings there, and and try to. We've got a really good feel of where we already are on our tax levy. I already have calculated with what we're assuming our net new construction to be, how much I have to build my budget. And like I said, it's not even $890,000. And I think many of you are aware we don't have a balanced budget to begin with. They're already applying $3 million of general fund balance in our budgets, to begin with. Where I'm going to cut $3 million is going to be interesting. With that being said, I will be coming in September to talk about our actuals. Even though we're budgeting usage of our funds, we're actually having surpluses in the end, so we're going to the better by a lot. So we definitely need to get a hold of that, but how we do that will be an interesting process. And then after we get all the meetings together, Carol Blackmore in my office and I work really hard to make that one book. I don't know if you've all seen that, but 600-page book there that we put together, and we have that ready for you before your end of October county board meetings, county budget hearings. When we go through the budget hearings, we have every department come up. We go through each department's budget, and anyone can ask them questions. Then after we get through every department's budgets, we have a time to have amendments. So anyone on the board floor can amend something on the budget or propose that. And it only takes a majority vote to pass that at that point. Once it's amended, so I hand you all a book that says executive budget, but then once we have all our amendments, and then Carol and I go back, get the amendments rolled through here, and we have an adopted budget. In that process, I know the county exec has authority to veto if anything on the budget. Then the board has more authority to veto anything vetoed, and then it's adopted. And then at that point, we give the property lister our apportionment, which is, here's what our tax levy is going to be, and then she gets ready to bill for the tax. And that pretty much wraps up our budget timeline on that. I pretty much touch on the high points. I have a 3-page work plan that I hand out to all the department heads, though. And on that note, any questions? Do you like that?
Thank
Kind
you.
of how you feel, right? Oh.
All right, we'll open it up here for questions. Thank you, Director Fitzgerald. I see a number of call-ins. So first is Supervisor Weiss, followed by Supervisor Defferty.
Thank you, Vicki. I commend you for keeping all the balls in the air. That's quite a job there. Question for me, the other operating expenses, what's that consist of? Just for my own.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, let me just find one real quick because I can tell you even better. It's office expenses, so you'd have your supplies, your printing, telephone, regular operating, which would be like subscriptions, membership dues, postage, repairs and maintenance on equipment, and that wasn't a good one. And I know other contracted services is another one. I gotta find one that had a little better. Your property and liability insurance as well.
Okay.
So it's pretty much anything that doesn't fit in the travel, labor, and fringe, and that's not capital, which would be over $5,000 piece.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Supervisor Weiss. Next speaker, Supervisor Defferting, followed by Supervisor Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to also commend you, Vicki, for doing a fantastic job, and I think you've been doing wonderful things, and I really appreciate this. I just had a question in regards to, well, I had a couple questions. Looking at the fringe expenses, from your knowledge, just in your position and how, and I'm not sure how long you've worked in your position, but do you see a trend in fringe expenses either going up or down over the last 5 years, and do you see that going up over the next 5 years?
So fringe, it consists of many different things. So it's Medicare and Social Security. Don't see that one going up because it's 7.65% and it has been for years. So I really don't see that FICA tax going up. WRS is part of that, and right now it's at 6.55% expense that the employer pays, and then I put 6.55%, as an employee in. That has fluctuated, but only between like 7% down to 6.55. So I think that's going to stay. It depends how the Wisconsin pension's doing. Right now, they're very strong, but other years they could have more of a liability where we'd have to put more into the fund. But right now, I don't see that. The big part of fringe that we'd have to worry about is the health insurance, dental insurance, and the workers' comp insurance. Dental insurance, we have been at a flat 0% for the last few years, so I don't see that being much to worry about. It's very small. Health insurance is really a moving target. I think we all know that. Last year, we first started our budget out thinking we were going to increase it 7.67%. Then it came in lower, and it was at 2.1. But we are self-funded, so it depends. If we have a premature baby, I heard it's millions of dollars. Open heart surgery. So they look at, before they give us our new rates for the year, they'll look at what our last couple months were the previous year. And so that one, I don't have a fortune, I'm not a fortune teller, but I don't think we're going to see health insurance going down anytime soon. So I think that will be our spot that we have to really worry about, but we can manage to a degree because we have a self-insurance fund, and we do have a healthy balance in there now because the board did let us put over the $800,000 that was moved out of there when it wasn't self-funded. But that's going to be, I think that's our ticking time bomb. So that I don't know if that helps answer that or not. And
Yeah, well, it certainly does, and I appreciate that. That's kind of what I thought. It confirmed my suspicions that we may be seeing an increase in that very soon.
Especially right now, the county executive really wants to keep it fair to the employees and not make them pay such a lion's share just because of retaining employees. We know right now is not an easy thing in this economy as well, because the jobs are easier to get at this point, and we have competition more than they ever have in the past.
One last question. I take it that the public safety, the 36.8, that includes jail expenses?
Yes. Yeah, jail improvements is under the sheriff as well.
Okay, all right.
So
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you Supervisor Defferting. Next speaker Supervisor Eisen, followed by Supervisor Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vicki, how do you reconcile that the 20 employees of the solid waste department are not counted as county employees?
That's a good. We have them in the back of the book, but you're right, they don't put them in with the salaries up here, so I have to look at them separately. I've asked that question myself. That's been new to me, why we don't have that there, and so I'm still searching for the answers, right, Mary Ann? Yeah, but we do look at that separately from the other labor at this point.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you Supervisor Eisen. Next speaker Supervisor Wojciechowski, followed by Supervisor Shorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the presentation. So this year will be my 4th budget session, and it's always my favorite because I just love learning about budgets. And when the first year I started, I didn't even know what a levy rate was, and you know, I've learned a lot. So thank you for this also. But I'm concerned every year we get the budget, and at the beginning it basically says the same thing about we are going to have to take money from the general fund because, you know, we're kind of in a tough spot with how we raise the operating levy rate. So, and you know, the solutions are we either cut things or we find new revenue sources, and both of those, you know, can be difficult to do. So I'm just, you know, concerned thinking long term, we're going to have to keep taking out of the general fund, and at one point it's going to catch up to us. So have we been looking into, you know, I would hate to see things cut because I think we do a really good job of managing the county, and there's a lot of great resources. I know Winnebago County is one of the few counties in Wisconsin that doesn't have a county sales tax. Has that been looked into? What other things have been looked into?
Sure, what I've looked at first, again, you know, I started a year ago, and when I looked at the budget, this is the first time I've been at a place that we said we're taking general fund balance to balance the budget. So that was new to me, not to have a balanced budget, so kind of gave me a little gut ache for a second. Because that was $3 million I needed to find, which I couldn't find yet last year, that I had, you know, I pretty much could go to every department and say, you're cutting, you're cutting, you're cutting, but what are we going to cut? Are we not going to give raises? Are we going to freeze raises and so forth? What I've looked at is they have, so I've been looking through a lot of parts first, and there has been a lot of, we budget labor as if all positions were filled. We at any given time have 30, right now we have 31 CNAs that are not being filled at Parkview. So this last year, I started asking departments to give me a wage turnover vacancy reduction because they're not going to use all the wages they say in their budget. Right now, I actually looked for Harold Singstock the other day. We, for 2018, because we just closed that year and got audited, we had $2 million of unused labor and fringe. That could have been what I said I was going to put it, you know, I did 2.7 million that I was going to put out the general fund balance. So I really want to look at these departments more. I see it in Parkview. They let me have that decrease. We decreased their budget by 600,000 last year for wages of the turnover, and they made budget still. I'd like to look at other departments such as the sheriff and the highway and so forth, and see where, or in Department of Human Services, and see where else we can account for that. I mean, if I could account, pretty much right now what I'm looking at with my tax levy targets, if I could account for $1.8 million of wages being off, I could balance my budget. And I already showed that 2 million was, we were 2 million under last year. So those are areas I'm looking at first too. I've heard that sales tax is really political. That would be for my boss to talk to you all about. I mean, right now I feel we have a very healthy fund balance. So you know, my personal opinion, not sure that's a great time to do it, but not my call on that. I would just account for it. But that would be it. But then you have to then lower your tax levy by that amount too, and then you don't get that tax levy back. So it's got its pros and cons as well. But I'm really trying to look through the budget this year and really try to find, I really want to hold people accountable when I look at their averages and do you really need that money because you haven't used it the last 3 years? So I'm going to, you know, last year was my first year here and I was barely, you know, I was still getting my ears wet or whatever they call it. But this year I will have to be a little more hammer-fisted on that as well and stay strong with that. So I plan on really looking for savings that way.
Thank you. Well, I think you're doing a fantastic job, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you Supervisor Wojciechowski. Next speaker, Supervisor Shorsey, followed by Supervisor Lenz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vicki, my thanks too. The stuff we're seeing coming out of your office is really very helpful.
Thank you.
In getting us prepared to make better decisions. It's funny, the timing with Supervisor Wojciechowski's comments. I too, I wanted to ask you, when you look at what's been happening with the tax levies, and is it fair to say that we are in an environment where this will continue, most likely continue, and challenge us going forward? And then, in addition to our own county levies, some of the funding coming from other governmental sources,
Yes.
Is that an environment you envision, that it's going to be more challenging from a tax perspective?
I do think so, and I know we have a new governor in, and he's trying to at least increase the tax levy limit, but I don't know what's going on, who will pass what on that, so I'm not going to guess on that one. I do see that as an issue going forward, and from my experience at the technical colleges, because we also had tax levy there, we had to look for all kinds of granting money just to keep going. But then with the grants, it's one-time money.
Right,
and
right.
then all of a sudden you have all these more employees and you can't sustain that. So you got to be very careful with those fundings when you have those project employees. And then so many times they want to keep them on after, and we can't sustain that once the grant monies are gone. Right now, I know the Department of Transportation's been very strong with giving us money. Some of the federal funds, I'm not sure if they'll keep coming in as they do. I know in public health right now we're getting tons of grant money because of the opioid crisis and so forth, but that can all end as well. Expenditures will keep rising, at least, like I said, we could.
Inflation.
Yep, inflation,
inflationary,
but with that, our revenues are not rising anywhere near the same, and something's got to give.
So from my perspective as a supervisor, I'd like to see us really be smart about this and make sure that we have done some pre-planning, some strategic planning. So we do have a plan. We can still respond to current situations, but I really would like to see us be more serious about looking at the future and having a plan to deal with it if we need to. And then just an aside question, do we know the average age of our workers?
I don't, but I can get that for you. I'm
Okay,
sure
so
HR
we are
has
monitoring it? Because that
Yeah.
helps with,
I'd be curious.
projections on healthcare expenses.
But I'm
and
sure HR
retirements.
has it, so I'll get that for you.
Okay, that would be an interesting thing to know. Thank you.
Thank you Supervisor Shorsey. Next speaker, Supervisor Lenz, followed by Supervisor Singstock.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Vicki, for putting this together. This was very informative for me. It's not really, the question I have isn't necessarily for you, and I don't know if this is the place for it, but is it possible to get this video from Oshkosh Media and have it out there on our site for either new supervisors or supervisors like myself that want to freshen up on the terminology before we go into the budget meetings?
Okay. Oh, Sue said it will be there. But I would like it to make it my mission to train all of you more so you understand what you're helping us decide with educated decisions, And I'd be even willing to do workshops if possible, if people would be willing to do that, if it was supported, but.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Very good. Thank you Supervisor Lenz. Next speaker, Supervisor Singstock, followed by Supervisor Binder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Vicki, I'm very thankful for your presentation. This is the first one I've ever heard being on this county board, and I'm very proud to have you as a financial director.
Thank you, Harold.
I want to add on to some of the things that were said and give some more. First of all 36 of us members are from all different walks of life. And I don't think it's fair to the county board, nor do I think it's fair to the county taxpayers to have people come in here and expect them to know all about finances. If some of the people in this room want to be honest with themselves, they probably can't even reconcile their own checking account. So and some of this, Mr. Chairman, is my suggestions to you. On each organizational day after the elections, I think that Vicky should be allowed to give this type of a presentation to the new board.
I'd like that.
A lot of this information is in that big, thick booklet. But I think the big, thick booklet scares some people.
Scary.
So that's why I think it's very important that we allow Vicky to continue to give financial presentations to this board. Another thing that I want to comment on, I experienced here tonight, which I've been on other boards and it happened there too. We spent approximately 45 minutes tonight talking about, I'll be extreme and I'll say a peanut item. And yet when we come to have resolutions regarding spending millions of dollars of the taxpayers' money, nobody talks about it. Well, I guess it's human nature that if they don't understand something, they won't ask questions. So again, it's important to allow Vicky to continue to give these financial presentations to the board members. Some of the things they could be talking about, for example, is it good to use reserves to balance the budget? Are there any surpluses available to put against future borrowing? Would it benefit Winnebago County to have management forecast expenses and revenues for 1 or 2 years? I think, I'm going to save the other one to the end. My experience on this county board, there's no excuse to raise any other taxes such as sales taxes. We have plenty of money. Right now, we got $28 million of surplus. Less than 5 years ago, we only had 20 million. So it's just going up consistently.
Yep.
Again, the board has to understand that so they can make it better, intelligent decisions. A year or so ago, Supervisor Keller and I had the honor of attending a workshop given by the administrator of Sheboygan County. And it was fantastic what he told us Sheboygan County does. I wish we would think about it. It's where they meet. Their board meets with the department directors. And they discuss finances. They discuss the budgets. And then when they go to the actual budget process, things work smoothly. In my experience, because I've been on many different committees, my experience is I also think that there are some of our department heads that could benefit from some financial training given by Vicky. One more suggestion I would like to make to be thought about, and that's regarding the Personnel and Finance Committee. That a person who is on the Personnel and Finance Committee and they have no financial experience, I guess the logical question would be, are they an asset to the committee or are they a liability? It's a very serious committee. This county board puts a lot of faith and confidence in the Personnel and Finance Committee, that they know what they're doing. So my suggestion, Mr. Chairman, that you think about that people elected to the P&F committee if they have some kind of a brief training from Vicky. I won't take any more time.
If I may just.
Please.
First off, Sheboygan County Herald did get me hooked up with someone there, and they do an all-day workshop with the department heads and the boards together, so it did sound like it was very helpful. Also, as far as financial training for the employees, my department's been trying to get out and train more, and that is one of my goals, is to really start training and having training sessions for the department heads, because I think a lot of them don't know I've had some of them that have been there 10 years, and they didn't realize how the process went because they haven't had to do that or something. So I would like to just have refresher trainings for all of them as well.
Thank you Supervisor Singsack. I think the suggestion about the training makes very good sense. I think, as you know, after the organizational meeting, we have certain presentations that seem to always occur, conflict of interest type stuff, certain rules. I think this sort of training that was provided here makes very good sense.
Thank you,
after
Mr.
organization.
Chairman.
Next speaker is Supervisor Binder, followed by Supervisor Fari.
Do you know if we're planning on bidding our health insurance out to see if our self-funded plan is actually competitive with the market out there? I know we haven't bid it out for the last 2 years. In Outagamie County, they have a catastrophic plan like we have.
Okay.
We basically cover the first 500,000, but the major claims, they had 6 major claims last year, and their premium went up $1.5 million, and that could be us next
Right.
year.
I will have to check with Mike Collard because he does take care of that, and I sit in on the meetings. I know he does look at different bids, but I will double check. I don't want to answer that for him just in case he wasn't planning on doing that. And I know we do have a stop loss that after we hit a certain amount, it's paid for, but that does affect your insurance premiums in the end. So I will get an answer for you on that.
Okay, because I know we haven't bid it out for the last 2 years, and I think as good stewards of our taxpayers' money, we ought to know if our plan is actually competitive with the market today.
Exactly. So I will get the answer, and he may have already done that. I just can't answer for him. So,
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you Supervisor Binder. Next speaker, Supervisor Fari, followed by Supervisor Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few thoughts on the comments that were made about the money we apply to the budget. From my perception, if we are increasing the undesignated fund balance, and in this case, 28 million, an unprecedented high, we are overtaxing the people. That's where you get the money from, because our budgets are too high. What's left goes into that fund. So that being the case, it is quite proper to apply that to the budget and give the money back to the people to maintain a level budget. So I think comments about, it's tough to do that and all that kind of stuff are really inappropriate. It needs to be returned to the people. It's been stated by your predecessor several times, the actual fund balance that this county should carry is 14 to 15 million.
And it
anything
still is,
over
yes.
that is surplus.
Correct.
We need to find a way to give it back to the people, not add to it, especially with a sales tax. So that's just my thoughts.
And if I may too, in our budgets the last few years, we said we're going to take money from the general fund in the budget, but when the actuals happen in our audited financial statements, we've actually had a surplus the other way, and a lot of it's been unbudgeted revenues that have come from Department of Human Services. Last year was 3.6 million. This year we got another 2.4 million we did not expect.
That needs to go
Yeah.
back to Mr. Singstock's comments, and I really
Yeah.
appreciate his comments.
Me
We
too.
need to do a better job of planning and predicting this
I agree.
income,
I agree.
Because that would help us adjust the budgets properly.
Agreed, and I feel we are not there yet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you Supervisor Fari. Next speaker, Supervisor Joyce, followed by Supervisor Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering, could you please clarify what the Highway Enterprise Fund includes?
Sure.
I understand it would include contracts with the towns in the county, but what other items does that include?
Sure. So to put it aside, they are a little bit of what I didn't touch on, they're a little different too, is they have county road maintenance. County road maintenance is part of the general fund, not the enterprise highway fund. So that does get tax levy, and it's about $1 million a year. Okay, so I just want you, so that's separate from the county road maintenance. So in the highway fund, they get contracted by the state to fix roads, CB, what 441 and what have you, and then the state reimburses them a certain amount. They do a lot of work within the county for our parking lots and so forth and paving. So it's that contracted work that they go out and do for the state. And I don't know as many details as I probably should be able to tell you tonight, but the county road maintenance is really important for you to know that that's sitting in the general fund.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you Supervisor Joyce. Next speaker, Supervisor Finch, followed by Supervisor Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Listening to Harold's comments, I cannot agree with that. Reason being is that when you get a new person on P&F, they're going to start learning and training for all walks of life. You're just not going to stick with what I would call the good old boys. So therefore, I can't go along with what Harold suggests, that just certain people should be on that committee. We are a open committee ourselves. Nobody has the rights over this person or that person, but if you're going to start saying, well, you got the expertise, we're going to put you here, no, you can't go there because you don't have that sort of expertise, then I'll tell you what, I'll be the first to get off this county board when we start dictating who can and who can't. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Finch. Next speaker, Supervisor Albrecht.
I pushed my button by mistake.
Thank you, Supervisor Albrecht. Seeing no other call-ins, we'll conclude that presentation. Thank you, Director Fitzgerald, for the information and presentation. Greatly appreciated. Okay, we have one more presentation tonight, and that's a presentation in regards to Taxiway Alpha reconstruction. It's a capital project presentation by our Airport Director, Jim Schell. Director Schell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Everyone should have a handout in their packet. It's a two-page memo that kind of outlines the project as a whole. And then there's also a diagram at the end of that packet that is the project limits for the reconstruction of Taxiway Alpha. So I'll just kind of briefly walk you through.
If we could please give Director Schell your attention. Thank you.
Sorry. So I'll just briefly walk you through the reconstruction project and the design as it stands to date. So Taxiway Alpha is the full parallel taxiway to the airport's primary runway, runway 1836. And it is indeed in reconstruction in the near term. Project is scheduled to begin construction in spring of 2020. The primary section of the taxiway to be reconstructed was built in 1967, so it's 50-plus-year-old concrete that's reached the end of its usable life. A PCI report, Pavement Condition Index report, was done in 2015. It's done every 3 years through the Bureau of Aeronautics. It shows the primary section of the taxiway to be reconstructed as a 64 out of a scale of 0 to 100, and projected by 2021 to fall to the minimum service level, which is a 60, essentially on that 100-point scale, or the point at which the pavement should be reconstructed. The taxiway is used on a daily basis. It's vital to the day-to-day operations of the airport, and it's the primary link from getting to the north end of the airport all the way down to the south end and servicing the primary runway, runway 1836. As part of the design of this project, it's an 8,200 linear foot reconstruction with 50-foot wide taxiway accompanied by 5-foot wide paved shoulders on either side to accommodate some additional width. The additional width is going to be integral to enhancing safety for the flying public when they use the taxiway during a runway, as a runway during EAA's AirVenture. Again, it is the flying public that comes in. It's, somebody flying a Cessna 172 that may have not flown a whole lot recently, and they're asked to land on a 50-foot wide piece of pavement. The standard is 60 feet and higher for runway widths, and therefore the additional width getting to 60 feet on the taxiway will definitely help the safety margins for that event and decrease the county's liability for authorizing takeoffs and landings on a less than standard width piece of pavement. The project's been in the county CIP for a number of years. And the Bureau of Aeronautics and the FAA CIP also as well for a number of years. It's currently a project that's scheduled to receive 90% FAA federal funding on it, 5% state funding, and the 5% match, which will be a resolution brought forward at the May 21st county board meeting. I would say we are a very fortunate position to be in the cycle for FAA discretionary funding that we're at. For a project like this, that's a pot of money that is competed for nationally by airports, and so any airport that's actually eligible to receive discretionary funds, it's highly competitive, and we're competing very well on this project because it is our primary taxiway, our number one taxiway. Excuse me. So I mentioned the additional width for the taxiway reconstruction. Also part of the taxiway reconstruction is an upgrade to its taxiway lighting system. So it'll be taking old incandescent fixtures and upgrading them to LED fixtures, which is going to help reduce our operating costs from electrical consumption standpoint, and things like bulb replacement and parts and hardware replacements on the taxiway lighting circuit. Stormwater drainage is also going to be improved between the runway and the taxiway by recontouring the infield areas, particularly the turf areas between that area, the Alpha taxiway and runway 1836, with plans to remove and replace a number of, I believe it's 3 culverts that are underneath taxiway Alpha that run in 3 separate areas underneath taxiway Alpha, from corrugated metal culverts to concrete culverts. 5 taxiway connectors are also scheduled to be reconstructed, Alpha 2 through Alpha 6, with the taxiway reconstruction as well. As I mentioned, we're in line for $9.4 million of federal funding, which is the 90% match from the FAA funding. 5% Bureau of Aeronautics at $525,000, and then the resolution that'll be brought forward for May 21st is $525,000, which is our 5% match for the county as the airport sponsor. And should the FAA discretionary funding come in lower than anticipated this year, we'll go ahead for 2020 and put in a supplementary grant request to finish out the project. The FAA is very good about current projects and fully funding if it has to be broken down into a phase 2, which a lot of times taxiway reconstruction, the last one we did was taxiway Bravo on the airport, is broken into a number of phases just because of the construction windows that we have and the amount of time that we have to get these done in the summer months. So the resolution that'll be brought forward again May 21st is to secure the county's portion of $525,000. With that, I'll take any questions you might have on the project.
Thank you, Director Schell. We'll open it up for any questions. I'll call on Supervisor Eisen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim, could you elaborate more on Plan Option B? If we're not able to get that $9.5 million, how would you project out that expense, which the county would need to spend the money to get the project done?
So the 5% match is our limit on the project, so it's not going to exceed 5% of the total project cost. Let's say when we go out for bid here in a couple of months and the bids come in at $9.5 million or something like that, 5% would be of that $9.5 million.
Well,
So
we're going to spend that up front to do the design work and to get a better feel of what the actual cost would be, the contracts would be. But the question is, if the federal government and the state government could only give us $6 million, and we've spent the $1 million between the state and the county, and then there's another $4 million in expenses, would we stretch the timeline of the project and take money 1 year at a time, or how would we come up with option B?
Well, we anticipate this project being fully funded in 2019. There are times when the FAA does come back and say, okay, well, the discretionary amounts come out, and let's say it's $8 million in 2019. Well, we'd go ahead and award the project based upon where the bids come in yet, so we don't know where the bids are going to come in on the project. Award the project based upon the amount of money that we have allocated at that time, what we have in our funds between the FAA funds, state funds, and the local share. And then in 2020, we request the funding to complete the project if that's necessary. So it's very, very possible where the bids come in on this that we could marry up the difference between what potentially might come in lower on our discretionary funds and where the bids line up at. So a lot of times these are your multi-year projects anyhow, and phased in 2 or 3 phases. So taxiway Bravo, I believe, is a 3-phase project, and so that's something that we've looked at. We've put the bid alternates in the project to align with the level of funding that we'll have in 2019.
This particular project is high enough on the level of needs versus wants to enable us to get that funding. Is that that's the kind of the inference that I'm taking away from here, is that the need for this in our circumstances is so high that we may not be able to get money from them to get a rest facilities or a mini terminal, but we could get the money for this hard structural project.
Well, this is certainly a need for the airport. It's the primary taxiway for the airport. It's the longest taxiway on the airport that services the primary runway. So when the winds are out of the north or the south and aircraft are using the north-south runway, they're utilizing Alpha to get there, whether it's landing and coming back up Alpha or going down Alpha to take off. So it certainly is a need for the airport, and this is a primarily federally funded project, whereas some other projects aren't necessarily eligible on the same path for federal funding. So this is a project that's competing rather well for discretionary funding. We just met with the FAA yesterday and then prior couple of weeks to talk about taxiway Alpha, and we're pretty confident that it'll come in where we think it's going to on the discretionary funds.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Supervisor Eisen. Next speaker, Supervisor Joas, followed by Supervisor Gabbard.
Thank you. Just have a question regarding the timetable. Provided the funding comes through as anticipated, and that you have that the construction phase would begin in the spring of 2020. What do you anticipate would be the completion time for the project? 24 months, 18 months? And also, how would this impact the EAA convention, if at all?
So the construction window is starting in early spring, potentially as early as April, depending on weather, and then going through prior to the convention, approximately a month prior to the convention. Then there's a blackout period that we wouldn't be doing. We need to have everything wrapped up as far as the first phase of the project. That would happen up to a month prior to the convention. Then approximately 2 weeks after the convention, with the construction documents that are being put together, there's another window then mid-August through, let's say, September, October timeframe, when the project can be completed. So it's potential that it can be completed in the same year, depending on where the funding level comes in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Joas. Next speaker, Supervisor Gabbard.
Just to give some clarity here, Jim and Pete from the airport and I were at Madison last week for the BOA annual CIP. There was a gentleman by the name of Rich from FAA and Mary from BOA. I walked out of that meeting with some questions answered about this funding. They were pretty confident that we would get all of this funding. And it was mentioned that I asked them what compares to Whitman Airport in the state of Wisconsin, and Rich from the FAA told me nothing. There is no other airport like Whitman in Wisconsin because of the EAA. And the FAA looks at needs differently for Whitman than they do for other airports. So I'll just stick to this one subject matter because it's on the taxiway, and we'll get into terminal situation later. Like I said, I left there last week. He was the one that, Rich from the FAA, said if we can't do it in 1 year, we'll break it down like we did with, as Jim mentioned, with taxiway Bravo. So I'm pretty confident that BOA and FAA is going to give us this money. We'll see how the bids come in, but usually we're all right with all this. So all the county is going to have to invest is $525. I know that's a lot of money, but it's a good deal. It's 5% of a $10 million project. That's a good kick for the game. So it is a need, but the FAA and BOA think it's a need also. So I hope when this resolution comes before the board, you'll support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gabbard. Seeing no other call-ins, we'll conclude that presentation. Thank you very much, Director Shell.
Thank you.
Okay, so that concludes our agenda tonight. Before we adjourn, though, really quickly, first of all, if you all don't know, it's Public Service Recognition Week. So just wanted to say thank you to all of you for your public service in the multitude of capacities that so many of you are involved, and certainly thank you to the staff as well. One final reminder of the County Board Tour on Monday, May 20th. You should have a schedule on your desk this evening. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. I'll call on Supervisor Albrecht.
I move we adjourn until our county board tour on the 20th of May at 8:30 in the morning, and then...
There's a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. No,
Opposed?
but then also, we have a regular meeting on May 21st, the following Tuesday.
That is correct. Thank you, Supervisor Albrecht. So there was a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everyone.